You are standing at the edge of a bike trail in Sitka, Alaska, on a gray morning in May. The air smells like rain and spruce. Somewhere ahead of you, in a stretch of woods that 100 people have already walked past twice, something pale is caught on a branch. It is a shirt. You don't know it yet, but the girl who wore it walked this exact path 2 nights ago, after celebrating her 17th birthday with the people she loved most. She has not been seen since. In less than 2 hours, the searchers combing this trail will find her. Right now, they are still hoping. Right now, somewhere in town, her parents are still telling themselves she is fine, that she is somewhere safe, that this will end the way most missing person stories end. With a phone call, an apology, a girl walking through the front door, a little sheepish about worrying everyone. It will not end that way. Something has already gone permanently, irreversibly wrong. You just don't know the shape of it yet. You're watching Cold Case Narrator, where cold cases get the heat they deserve. This case matters because it is not just the story of a murder. It is the story of an innocent man nearly destroyed by a confession he never should have made, and a guilty man who lived free for over 2 decades in the same small town where he committed his crime, walking past the family of the girl he killed again and again for 15 years. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one. New here? Hit like and subscribe. It keeps us digging. Now, back to Sitka. Her name was Jessica Irene Bagan. She was born on May 3rd, 1979, the youngest of 4 sisters in a close, loving family. If you had asked anyone in Sitka to describe her in one word, most of them would have said the same thing: independent. She had her own mind, her own opinions, her own quiet stubbornness that showed up in small ways. When her dog Sam ran off and disappeared for 2 weeks, Jessica refused to accept that he was gone for good. She kept looking. She kept believing he'd come home, and eventually he did, tired, hungry, but alive. She loved to fish with her family. She loved cooking even more, and she talked seriously about doing it for a living one day. She carried a camera with her, most places she went, catching small, ordinary moments that other people would have simply walked past without noticing. It would matter later. It would matter more than anyone could have predicted that a girl who paid this much attention to the world around her would vanish from a path she had walked 100 times before, in a town that genuinely believed nothing like this could happen here. On the evening of May 3rd, 1996, Jessica turned 17. She celebrated at her sister's home, a small, casual gathering, family, a few close friends, nothing anyone thought to document, because nothing about it felt like it needed remembering. Because it was her birthday, her parents let her stay out later than her usual curfew. Sometime after midnight, in the very first hours of May 4th, Jessica said her goodbyes and started walking home. It was only about a mile down a bike trail that cut through the woods near what had been Sheldon Jackson College. She had made this walk more times than she could count. In this town, at this hour, a 17-year-old girl walking home alone simply wasn't something anyone thought twice about. Sitka was the kind of place where people left their front doors unlocked, where the biggest danger anyone worried about was a bear wandering too close to the trail, where the local police blotter rayed like a small joke, a noisy game of croquet, a suspicious dollar bill. Nothing happened here. She never made it home. Her parents woke up the next morning to an empty bed. At first, they weren't alarmed. Maybe she'd fallen asleep at her sister's. Maybe she'd lost track of time. But the morning stretched into afternoon, and there was no phone call, no message, no sound of her key in the door. By evening, waiting was no longer an option. Jessica's father drove to the Sitka Police Department and reported his daughter missing. Search and rescue teams moved into the woods the next day. For 2 full days, they searched every trail, every ditch, every stretch of forest near the path she would have taken. Nothing. The town held its breath, hoping for the best and quietly bracing for the worst. Then, on May 6th, someone spotted fabric caught near the bike trail. It was Jessica's shirt. Less than 2 hours later, they found her. Here is what the searchers did not know when they started that morning: that the ordinary trail they had walked past dozens of times already held her, hidden beneath a fallen tree, just off the path. The autopsy would later confirm what the discovery already suggested. Jessica had been sexually assaulted. The cause of death was asphyxiation. She was 17 years old, one day past the birthday her family had celebrated together. And now, she was the reason an entire town would never feel safe the same way again. Word spread through Sitka fast. People who had grown up believing nothing bad happened here were suddenly forced to accept that something unthinkable had already happened. The wildlife in these woods had never been the real danger. A person did this. Someone who had walked these same streets, shopped at the same stores, maybe even smiled and said hello to people who knew Jessica's family. A little over a week later, more than 1,500 people gathered together for a candlelight vigil. Over a third of the town's entire population. They stood in near silence, grieving a girl almost everyone had known, at least by face. Nobody spoke much. There wasn't much left to say. And here is the uncomfortable truth about what happened next. The pressure to find Jessica's killer was enormous. The town wanted an answer, and it wanted one immediately. That pressure would very nearly destroy the life of a man who had nothing to do with her death. His name was Richard Bingham. He was 34 years old, a janitor at the local college, living alone on a boat in the harbor. He drank heavily, and when he drank, he sometimes lost entire stretches of memory. His friends knew this about him. Some of them liked to use it. There's a story people still tell, that someone once convinced Richard he'd stolen a fish from his own workplace during a blackout. He didn't remember doing it, so he believed them completely and showed up the next day with a replacement fish to make things right. His boss had no idea what he was talking about. Richard had done nothing wrong. He simply believed whatever people told him about his own actions, because he genuinely could not be certain they were lying. After Jessica's death consumed the town, one of his drinking buddies brought it up. "You were around that night," he said. "You black out. What if it were you?" The idea took root in Richard's mind and would not let go. He started having nightmares, flashes of something he couldn't explain. So he did what felt, to him, like the responsible thing. He walked into the Sitka Police Department and asked for help. He told the officers about the dreams. He said he was scared he might have hurt Jessica and simply couldn't remember doing it. He trusted them completely. He thought they were going to sit down with him and help him find the truth, whatever it turned out to be. Instead, they questioned him for hours using a method called the Reed technique, a strategy built on convincing someone that evidence already proves their guilt, even when no such evidence exists. For a confident, clear-headed person, that approach usually falls apart fast. Richard was neither of those things. He was already unsure of his own memory, and he wanted, more than anything, to trust the people questioning him. Slowly, he began agreeing with the details the officers gave him, not because he remembered them, because he was told, again and again, that they were true. Nothing he said came from his own memory. Every piece traced back to something the officers had said first. 10 days after Jessica's murder, on May 15, 1996, Richard Bingham was arrested and charged with her killing. He spent months in isolation for his own protection, then was moved into the general population, where he became an easy target. He would later describe it as the worst stretch of his entire life. His trial was moved to Juneau, since finding an impartial jury back home felt impossible. His public defender fought for him hard. She brought in an expert on false confessions, someone who could explain clearly how an innocent person ends up admitting to something they never did. Then came the moment that changed everything. A scientist from the state crime lab took the stand and testified that the DNA collected from the crime scene did not match Richard Bingham, not even close. The trial lasted 10 days. The jury needed only 2 hours to reach its decision, not guilty on every single charge. Richard walked out of that courtroom a free man. But free did not mean safe. He left Alaska almost immediately, first to Seattle, then further still, trying to put as much distance as he could between himself and a town that might never fully believe he was innocent. Somewhere out there, the person who actually killed Jessica was still walking free. And here is what almost no one in Sitka realized at the time. In that very same year, in that very same small town, another man was already standing trial for a strikingly similar crime. After Bingham's acquittal, the case went cold. The Bagan family refused to let it die. They hired a retired NYPD detective named John Baeza who arrived in Sitka determined to find what local police had missed. His approach was methodical. Investigators had recovered pubic hairs from the crime scene, reddish or reddish blonde in color. Baeza's strategy was to comb through DMV records, pulling out every man in the area who matched that description, tracking each one down, and asking for a DNA sample. Year after year, the list grew. Men swabbed their cheeks believing they were helping, and year after year, the results came back the same. No match, no match, no match. More than 100 men were tested this way. More than 100 times, the case stayed exactly where it started. Here is what none of them knew while all of that was happening. Go back to March of 1996, 2 months before Jessica was killed. A worker at C-Mart, the local grocery store, found her 18-year-old co-worker crying in the break room. When asked what was wrong, the girl stated that a local mechanic had severely assaulted her. The police were told. But this man wasn't arrested right away. Weeks passed. Jessica was murdered in early May. Richard Bingham was already sitting in a jail cell, accused of her killing. And only then in June did police finally arrest the mechanic for the assault, reported back in March. He went to trial the following year. On the stand, he cried, admitted something had happened between them, but insisted it was consensual, not forced. The jury deliberated only a few hours before acquitting him. He didn't leave Sitka after that. He kept working. He kept living in the same small town, on the same streets, walking past the same grocery store where an 18-year-old girl had once broken down crying about him. For almost 15 more years, he stayed exactly where he was, an ordinary face in a town that had already buried one of its daughters. And here is the detail that should stop this entire story cold. During that 1996 assault case, prosecutors drew this man's blood. Standard procedure. Nothing flagged as important. That sample was logged, stored, and left there. It was never compared to the DNA collected from Jessica's body. While John Baeza tracked down man after man across Sitka, swabbing cheeks and chasing leads based on hair color alone, the answer may have already been sitting inside a police evidence locker the entire time, filed away, untouched, waiting for a kind of science that, in 1996, simply did not exist yet. Every case on this channel is weeks of digging, real records, real families. If this one is sitting with you, take 10 seconds, hit like, and subscribe. It's what keeps Cold Case Narrator going and keeps cases like this from being forgotten. There's still a name that needs to be said. Stay with us. Years passed, more than 20 of them. Jessica's parents grew older without an answer. Every birthday that came and went was a birthday she never got to have. The case sat exactly where it had sat for decades. Cold. Then, in a case out of California, investigators cracked open a decades-old serial murder investigation using a method almost no one had used before. They didn't search for the killer's own DNA. They uploaded his genetic profile to a public genealogy database, the same kind of site regular people use to trace their ancestry, and built out his family tree, branch by branch, until it led them to one specific person. It worked, and once it worked there, investigators everywhere started asking the same question. Could this solve their own cold cases too? In September of 2018, Sitka's cold case unit decided to try. Think about what that actually means. Crime scene DNA doesn't need to belong to a criminal already on file. It just needs to share enough genetic material with someone, anyone, who voluntarily uploaded their own DNA online out of simple curiosity about their family history. A genealogist begins pulling threads. A third cousin here. A forgotten branch of a family tree there. Slowly the map narrows. It is less like reading a lab report and more like watching a net tighten around one specific address, without the person inside that address having any idea it's happening. In February of 2019, the DNA profile from Jessica's case went up onto a public genealogy database, submitted through a company called Parabon Nanolabs. What followed was months of quiet, painstaking work. A genealogist tracing connections backward through generations, building a family tree that stretched further into the past before slowly working its way forward again, towards someone alive today. Every new branch either brought investigators closer or forced them to start over. And while all of this was happening on paper, 2,000 miles away in Arkansas, a man was living his life completely unaware. He had a routine, a home, a life he considered ordinary and settled. As far as he knew, whatever happened in Sitka back in 1996 had been left behind decades ago, buried under time and distance. He was wrong. By the end of 2019, the family tree investigators had spent over a year building collapsed down to a single, confirmed name: Steve Allen Branch. The same mechanic. The same man who once cried on the witness stand, claiming a sexual assault case was consensual. The same man whose blood had been sitting untouched in an evidence locker since 1996, compared to the DNA that could have identified him decades earlier. Two stories that had run parallel for over 20 years, never quite touching, had just slammed together. But a family tree isn't proof. It's a direction, not a conviction. To confirm it, investigators would need something Branch had never willingly given anyone: his own DNA. Investigators watched from a distance for weeks, hoping for something as simple as a discarded coffee cup. In January of 2020, that quiet surveillance began in Arkansas. Weeks passed with nothing usable, so they shifted their approach, obtaining a sample from one of Branch's own relatives instead, someone who never fully realized what it might mean for their family. By May of 2020, the kinship analysis came back. The Branch was most likely the source of the DNA collected from Jessica's body all those years ago. Most likely, not confirmed. There was only one way left to close this out. On August 3rd, 2020, investigators pulled up to Steve Branch's home in Arkansas and knocked on his door. He answered, and they laid it all out. The genetic connection, the decades-old case, the name Jessica Baggin, spoken to him directly for the first time in over 20 years. He said he didn't know her. He said he had no memory of any murder case back in his old hometown, a case that had once consumed the entire town of Sitka for months. When investigators asked for a voluntary DNA sample, he refused. There was nothing more they could do without a warrant, so they left, telling him they'd return once they had the legal authority to require one. 30 minutes later, Steve Branch took his own life, ensuring he would never face a courtroom. The local authorities would later rule his sudden death a suicide. Investigators still needed answers. They secured a warrant to collect a DNA sample during his autopsy, testing it directly against the evidence preserved from Jessica's case for over 2 decades. On August 10th, 2020, the results came back. A complete match. The following day, Alaska's Department of Public Safety Commissioner, Amanda Price, stood in front of cameras, photos from Jessica's final birthday displayed behind her, taken just hours before she disappeared. Price announced that after 24 years, the case was officially closed. Closed by exception, because the man responsible would never face a trial. He was already gone. Except the story wasn't quite finished. Public records later showed that the lead detective who had worked Jessica's case back in 1996 had married one of Steve Branch's own sisters. He never responded to questions about it. No explanation, no comment, just silence, sitting. In the middle of everything else, this case had already revealed. When the news reached Richard Bingham in Bellingham, Washington, it hit him instantly and hard. 24 years of people quietly believing he might have done it, undone in a single announcement. He said it still upset him, even now, even with his name finally, completely cleared. Today, Bingham lives with multiple sclerosis. He lost an eye to complications from diabetes. He is hoping to find a lawyer willing to help him seek some form of compensation for a life interrupted by an accusation he never deserved. We needed to know who killed Jessica Baggin. We needed to know for 24 years. And now that we do, the honest truth is that closed and solved are not always the same thing. There will be no trial, no courtroom explanation, no chance to ask Steve Branch what those 24 free years actually meant to him, or whether Jessica was truly the only one. She was 17. She loved to fish with her family. She loved cooking most of all, and she talked seriously about doing it for a living one day. She carried a camera with her, catching small moments that other people walked past without noticing. She was stubborn in the best way, the kind of stubborn that kept her looking for a lost dog until he finally came home. She should be 44 years old today. She should have had a career in a kitchen somewhere, photographs of her own family, a whole life. This case took from her before it ever really began. If there is one thing this case leaves behind, it's this. The truth doesn't always disappear just because no one is looking for it. Sometimes it sits in an evidence locker for 24 years, waiting. Cold cases are not hopeless cases. They are simply cases that haven't found the right question yet. If this one stayed with you, and it should, hit like, subscribe, and tell us which moment landed hardest. No case stays cold forever. We'll see you in the next one.